everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Reinventing Finance, our podcast together with Tom. Tom, how are you this fine morning?
Yeah, very fine. Looking forward to our talk to Shameer.
Likewise. Now you've already, now usually I say hi, our guest, Shameer, it's welcome to have you on board. Shameer, how are you this fine morning?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Not bad at all.
Awesome. Listen, why don't we start with a just kind of very brief introduction about yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Shameer. I'm founder and MD at Growth Gorilla. Growth Gorilla is a growth marketing agency. We specialize in the fintech sector. We're coming into our sixth year now. Prior to this, I was marketing director at an online trading platform. And prior to that, my background was financial services, mostly on the equity broking side.
So when you say, what is the reason for focusing exclusively on fintech? What was the gist of that rather than going a little bit broader?
Yeah, of course. Two things really. First and foremost, my background in the online trading space is primarily the reason. It's just, it was very easy for me to strike up conversations with similar sorts of organizations that had faced the challenges that we had faced, and then obviously, onboard them as customers, as clients. The other reason as well is that I think when you're setting up a service business, it always makes sense to really sort of narrow in on a specific target customer. You've got a choice really, haven't you? You've got to be really, really narrowed in terms of your service offering to a broad audience, or be somewhat broad to a narrow audience. We've kind of sort of hit in this, we're sort of in the middle. We've got sort of a mid, not mid-range, but a reasonable number of services specifically that we offer to the fintech sector.
That makes sense. That's probably already, half of business school, right there. When you've, as what Tom and I always like, because it brings things into perspective, is, some things kind of concrete. When you've mentioned, we've had, striking up a conversation because you've faced and solved or been stuck with similar problems like others. What are usual problems that your customers face or that you faced, some of which you might just have to deal with because that's just life, and some of which you kind of are able to solve? And so we can maybe segue into from the problem into your then kind of solution.
Yeah, of course. So, I think problems that we've got no choice but to face is, on the marketing side anyway, is, the product that you're working with. That's obviously, you do have some degree of influence over the development of the product going forward, but ultimately, the product is the product at the end of the day. If there's, a subpar product, or you're not as competitive, or you're not as good as your competitors, whatever it may be, that's something that as a marketer that you've somewhat got to deal with and you've got to work around. In terms of kind of problems that we tend to sort of work on, or that seems to be fairly sort of common, really is around two things really. One is actually working out how to go to market and get in front of your first set of companies. And then once you've kind of nailed that, the second problem that customers tend to face is how to scale, and actually how to actually grow as a business and increase the number of leads that they're bringing in, or the number of users that they're driving into their platform. Because what worked in the early days won't necessarily work as you begin to grow. And usually then as well, you're also battling with the fact that you've got bigger targets, you have a larger demand for the number of customers that you actually need, and therefore the amount of revenue that you need to produce as well. So you've got to find ways to really sort of scale the business and drive those customers in. And then I think the sort of third thing that kind of links into the second really is working out how you can bring in good quality and higher value customers at a competitive cost. And they're kind of the sort of 2 or 3 things that clients tend to face.
Would it be okay if we just kind of drop one level down on each of these aspects? Because I think that's I'm not a marketer, but I think I can follow that structure. When you say how to go to market, which broad topic, right? Very broad topic. Which buckets do you guys focus on, and what different things do customers, your customers, not your customers, kind of need to answer in order to sensibly start spending money?
Yeah, of course. So I think the biggest thing is really nailing down who their target audience is initially to begin with, and being really, really clear on that. So a lot of times we'll speak to younger brands who, when we ask the question, who are we targeting here? The worst answer we can hear is, oh, everyone. And then the slightly better answer is, well, we want to target X group of individuals, but actually, if it's too broad, it makes it rather difficult, especially if you've got a finite amount of budget. The second thing is then being really, really clear on what your value proposition is going to be. So what is it that you are actually putting in front of your customer? What problem are you actually solving? And how does it benefit them? And becoming really, really clear on that. Once you kind of nail down those 2 things, it becomes really, really easy to then answer the following questions, which are, right, how do we get in front of these customers? And therefore, what are we going to say to them? And what platforms or what marketing channels can we use to acquire these users?
So would you, I think that's it makes intuitive sense, right? I was always thinking, are you a fan of, let's say, let's work through some personas, for example? I've kind of seen that, or I would, maybe an alternative approach to say, listen, we've already identified certain best practice platforms for retail and SME customers, etc. Depending on what that is, I don't know whether that's Google, Instagram, LinkedIn, you name it, right? I don't know whether you include email marketing, I don't know. And just so, here are the things that these platforms provide as information in order to identify certain target audience. Because I might want to say, I don't know, let's make a hypothetical example. I want to target SME customers. These are insurance brokers, and I want to offer them a better PI insurance. And I think it's a good idea because they have, everyone needs a PI insurance to sell to broker insurance. And I have this product that just is 10% cheaper, whatever. That's my value proposition. Whether that's a good value proposition remains to be seen. Now, there's lots of other things, right? Ideally, I would like to know lots more about, let's say, I want to exclude certain brokers that advise on investment products, because that increases risk. But I don't actually have that data. And I think we can kind of go through these things. Is that something that you recommend to at least sanity check? Do you do both? Where do you usually start on how to identify your target audience? And what's your feedback? At which point do you say, okay, this is good enough? How defined does it have to be?
Yeah, so it's slightly different, B2C versus B2B. With B2B, we want to look at the types of companies that we're targeting. What are the typical job functions that we're trying to target? The location, obviously, as well, the size of company that they're working at. And these are kind of all of the data points that we can target on platforms like LinkedIn. but like you said, you are limited by the targeting capabilities on a per platform basis. So, for example, we've had several situations where brands want to target specifically, say, e-commerce or fintechs, and the problem with that is that you can't drill down to that level on a platform like LinkedIn. LinkedIn only has retail and it only has financial services. So you kind of got two choices then. You've got to either look at alternative platforms, or if you can actually identify the names of the companies that you're going after, then we can get that uploaded into LinkedIn and say to LinkedIn, look, target these particular job functions at these particular companies. Or like we did for one client that wanted to target fintechs. Actually, it was easier to target their customers or their target customers on Twitter, because actually we could go in and find a lot of Twitter accounts that were really, really focused towards the fintech sector, and then put in various layers of targeting on that. To kind of go back to your broker example, that's always an interesting one, brokers, because in the UK, for, let's say, lending, for example, there's only about 800 odd brokers. It's actually a very, very small number. And then within those brokers, you probably, depending upon how the broker works, you're either targeting at a high level because you want to put that proposition in front of a decision maker. And the alternative may be is that, the brokers are working somewhat independently under a particular or a single license. So you may then need to go abroad for those particular ones. But there's no targeting capability on LinkedIn to target brokers. There's no button that says insurance brokers or lending brokers. So really what you have to then do is find all of the companies, make a list, get the website address, upload that into LinkedIn, and then target that way. If you're targeting B2C, then that is definitely easier, I would say. And if we're talking about, say, an insurance product like life insurance, or car insurance, whatever it may be, again, that point, you then need to say, well, that's actually a really, really big target audience. I mean, it's actually absolutely humongous, really, when you think about it. Because something like car insurance, you're targeting anyone who drives a car effectively. So, what type of drivers are you trying to go after? Are you trying to go after younger drivers, older drivers, drivers that live in rural areas, drivers that live in busy areas, that sort of stuff. And once we have that information, we can then go, okay, well, we want to target younger drivers in, say, rural areas. Okay, great. We can use a platform like Meta and add in some layering and say, okay, we want to target people who own a car, because I think there's a way of doing that on Facebook, and who are of a particular age that live in a particular area. And then you can serve an ad and put an ad in front of them. Where it starts to get a little bit cloudy is when we are targeting SMEs, because SMEs may not always have a strong LinkedIn presence. You might be able to find them on LinkedIn, but they may never log in because they won't use LinkedIn like we do. If you own a chain of plumbing supplies, you're probably not going to be on LinkedIn. So that becomes a tad more difficult. And really what you need to do is find data points on platforms like Meta that allow us to get in front of the audience. But a really good example of this, and it's not insurance and it's B2C, but it's a great example of how you can build your own audience. So we had a client who wanted to target a Muslim audience because their product happened to be Sharia compliant. Now, there's no way on Meta that you can target people based upon their religious beliefs, because obviously it would cause all sorts of problems, right? With right-wing groups and all of that stuff. But what we can do is find interests that are very common to Muslim individuals. So that might be specific groups, or particular brands that South Asian people have more likely to follow. And then maybe some language targeting and capabilities, and maybe some location stuff, if there's particular communities in particular areas. And then what we did there is that we built out this target audience, and we drove all of that traffic into a very specific landing page that effectively said, if you're not Muslim, this product's not for you. And then what we did was that anybody who then clicked on the call to action on the landing page, we fed that data back into Meta and effectively said, can you find more people that look like this? And then it turned into this feedback loop. And then we created this lookalike audience that was, we knew was Muslim because, we'd been really, really clear on the targeting up front. And then we've been really, really clear on the landing page. If you're not, then this isn't for you. And then we've gone back to Meta and said, good, keep finding more and more people like this. And eventually what happened, that lookalike audience became more and more optimized because the pool of individuals we were targeting effectively became more potent, in terms of the number of Muslim individuals in that audience, in that group that we were targeting. And you can do similar things like that for SMEs and audiences that are somewhat quite large. It doesn't work as effectively for a B2B audience, but then the customer journey that you're taking a B2B audience on is very different. That's very the sales cycle there is a lot longer. So the ads that you're promoting on a platform like LinkedIn are very awareness to begin with, drive that awareness, and then you move down and then start giving them a little bit more direct marketing type ads, book a call, book a demo, that sort of stuff. And then that goes into once it turns into a lead, effectively, then it goes into the business development piece and the sales piece thereafter. So yeah, it's a bit of a long-winded answer.
No, I think that's very interesting, because what you would basically if I understand the process correctly, it's, you need to be clear on your target audience. Okay, you can come up with, however, the client has some view. I think there's some discussion around it, but then sanity check that with the targeting capabilities of different platforms, and then really coming up with smart proxies of it. Because let's say everyone can bid on car insurance, right? You're just going to be outbid. It's just, we've earlier said with so it's almost, I would say, one of the value adds of having someone who has a broad experience of running campaigns is almost how to work around and augment what the platforms already give you turnkey. Because I would imagine anyone can almost do that. Anything you can just click and target, anyone else could also do, depending on what your product is. That's probably more problematic. Going in and saying, okay, we have a religious audience, what could be their interests around that audience, and kind of creating this flywheel, I think seems to be one of the key benefits of doing that, and that come with experience in a way, right? Because as you've said, the playbook might change based on your target audience. I thought that was, but I understand SMEs are problematic. Would you say, because I'm not on Facebook anymore. I'm also not on Insta, so I'm just out of curiosity. And I agree, certain traditional businesses, like contracting business, doesn't seem to be very active on LinkedIn. Or you sometimes even have, and you might have local networks in Germany, you have Xing, and it's also the same. But if I'd say, I think, let's take the example of insurance brokers, from some tangential knowledge, they still seem to be active on Facebook for some reason, because we have this kind of older audience that's probably gonna die with Facebook and the platform. But I want to target them on a B2B setting. What would be, so targeting the kind of private individuals who might own or work in plumbing or, so contraction business or insurance brokerage and trying to do business content via Facebook, would you gut feeling, is that a good idea? Or would you say, this is
look,
cringy? That's not what Facebook is for. That's not what people,
it doesn't matter if Facebook's for that or not, right? I remember one, I actually went in to go see years back when we first started, and I mentioned to the client that actually, leveraging Facebook might not be a bad idea for them, and they sort of, rejected the idea immediately, and was very rude about it. But in reality, it doesn't really matter, particularly for small business owners, because, small business owners are always thinking about their business. In fact, I think that goes for anyone, really. I think anyone who's in a decision-making position in an organization is always thinking about their job. And just because, I'm serving you an ad on Facebook when you're in play mode as opposed to work mode, doesn't dilute, the message, the message that you're putting in front of them. So, there's absolutely nothing wrong with putting a business-related ad, on a social network, on a personal social network like Meta or Twitter or Insta or Threads, whatever now. That's not going to make a difference. Prime example of that is, look at QuickBooks and Xero. Their primary platform, or one of the primary platforms for targeting their customers is Facebook and Insta. And that's where they're scooping up all of their audience from. It would not be cost efficient for them to do it on LinkedIn, and they wouldn't reach their target customer. One thing we haven't talked about is search as well. Google Ads as well. Well, two things we haven't talked about is influencer marketing and Google Ads. So Google Ads, is if you've got in your example, if you've got a product that is, say, price, it's a common product, it's not a disruptive product, it's just a price-based proposition. So something like, professional indemnity insurance or car insurance, whatever it may be. If there's an existing demand for products like that, then, Google Ads is kind of going to be your go-to, because if you're not going to have to educate the audience on what the product is, and it's more a case that they need the product because of law, so professional indemnity insurance and car insurance both fall into that category, then they're going to be searching for that. Every individual is going to be searching for that once every 12 months, when it comes up for renewal. So, Google search is a great way to just target that audience for, specific keywords that they're typing in. Cheap car insurance, for example, it's going to be very expensive because everybody's bidding on those terms. All your competitors are bidding on those terms. But if you can capture that traffic, if you've got some good quality ad copy, and then you drive them into a good quality landing page, you'll start converting that audience, and that will actually be more cost efficient than a Facebook. So that's another angle that insurance companies, InsurTechs, fintechs can go down. The other one is influencer marketing, which has become more and more popular over the last sort of 12 and 18 months. And, that's a great channel to leverage if you want to either drive brand awareness for a new proposition, or if you're targeting a specific set of customers. Because if there's a creator out there that is, talking to effectively your target customer, if you strike a deal with them to get them to sponsor their YouTube videos or their podcast, or you get them to do a review, or you get them to do an integrated piece of content, maybe a video series talking about professional indemnity insurance, they're going to communicate that message to their target audience, which happens to be yours. And they act as almost like an independent third party that's providing social proof. So that can be a great angle to get in front of your customers. It will work for B2B as well, but I think it'll work more on that sort of lower end of the market where you've got a decent amount of volume. I think when you start talking, you're trying to target enterprise size customers, it's not going to work. And I think brokers as well, it's probably not the best angle to take. I mean, frankly speaking, if I was going to target brokers, I would start putting on social events. That's the quickest and easiest way to get in front of them. Completely veering away off the digital marketing. If you've got a pool of 800 brokers, you'd be better off, putting money behind the bar and bringing them into your community, bringing them into your network and somewhat schmoozing them a little bit. That's going to be a more efficient way to get in front of them. But for the more sort of B2C, the SMEs, that sort of stuff, the digital marketing route is going to be an efficient way to get in front of your customers.
I know you've my understanding is that you guys at Growth Gorillas are focusing on digital, but just as you've done the segue of non-digital events, what I've anecdotally heard is that people start like TV. I mean, I don't watch TV, but because it gets quite cheap, works for some. So for example, TV is great to target, I don't know, what was it? Consultants, because they're in their hotel and they have their morning, because that's where they actually still people, as an example, or actually direct mailing, the traditional direct mailing, because if I compare my inbox versus my actual mailbox, there's a disconnect. And I actually open these letters because they come so little. Do you have a view on that in general? Do you tie these things together? Because obviously at some point with social events might be slightly different, but I would say with television or potentially with direct mailing, we do want to lead them. We're not suggesting, please fax us back or mail us back your handwritten reply. That's not what we're suggesting, right? We try to get them on a link or a QR code to then kind of move them into digital. What was your exposure to this, and just kind of broad stroke advice, worth giving it a shot, or under which conditions would you, because we've also mentioned kind of cost effectiveness, look at the mix of these different channels?
Yeah, so looking at TV, again, I think it's about how big is that pool of customers that you're going after. Again, if we're talking about brokers, they're in very, very low numbers, so it wouldn't make sense. But if you're targeting, say, SMEs, or you're targeting retail customers, B2C, then TV is a great way to get in front of that audience. And now there's lots of ways to leverage TV. So you've got linear TV, which is obviously your daily programming on your core channels, and you can pick up spots on those channels quite cost effectively if you buy at particular times. But also you've got CTV and programmatic TV as well, right? So you can pick up advertising spots on, say, channels that are on Sky. But they're quite smart and they're quite intelligent because they have data on their users as well, much like Facebook, much like Twitter, much like LinkedIn, and they can target geographically, they can target on interest, they can target on ethnicity, and then you've got things like channels like the Bloombergs and the CNBCs, which are very, very good to communicate financial services products. So all of the trading platforms and all of the brokers will be on Bloomberg and be on CNBC. Because they have, they're generally on in most of the, on a TV screen somewhere, in the building of any company in the financial district in pretty much any country. I mean, if you walk into, HSBC in Canary Wharf, I think they've got like half a dozen screens that sit behind the reception desk. And when I was client side, we used to run TV on Bloomberg, and my wife was waiting in the foyer, and she remarked that was my company's TV ad to her boss. So you can hit those target customers that way as well. And then there's again, even if you're going down to certain sort of ethnicities, there's ethnic channels and stuff like that. So We done a campaign recently in partnership with another agency to target Nigerians, Ghanaians, and Indians in the UK. And what we did there is that we advertised across, I think, just over a dozen TV channels, ethnic TV channels here in the UK. We coupled that with CTV, which is effectively, custom targeting, basically, based upon postcodes, any sort of information around ethnicities, and then also interests as well. So because we were going after, an Indian audience, we picked on a lot of the sporting channels and made sure that we were, prevalent during cricket, because you're just going to have such a high degree of Indians watching that. So yeah, you can make, TV, work for you. We had Jasper Martens, CMO at PensionBee on our podcast, and they did a test on linear TV, for their pensions product for daytime TV, starting off at 30 grand. And they got that working really effectively for them. So yeah, absolutely, TV's a way to go. Again, just depending upon your target customer. In terms of direct mail, it's always an interesting one. So again, you can be quite smart about that as well. So you can go quite broad with door drops, and target, postcode based, and hit particular areas. Great way of targeting, get in front of high net worth individuals, and give them some sort of direction on the direct mail into a website, maybe with some offer. We had a gold investment platform, and we wanted to target, funnily enough, a massive affluent Indian audience, slightly older generation, that had a propensity to buy gold, but move them onto a digital platform. And we worked with another agency to develop a direct mail solution, targeting very specific locations in the UK, and that worked very effectively. I think it can be great for B2B, because I think if you're sending something that's good quality through the post, the example I always give is doing the champagne campaign. So when a target customer, or organization that you want to work with has some good news, send them a bottle of champagne. It'll cost you 50 quid, but it will absolutely 100% get their attention, and get you to have a conversation with them. There was a client that we wanted to work with, and the CMO was Irish, and recently the company had done this partnership with what are they called? There's like little figurines with the bobbly heads or whatever it was.
Okay.
Pop in a box or something like that. I don't know. So I got a Conor McGregor one and I sent that to her. And I said, we'll help you knock out the competition. And I, got a message immediately back on my LinkedIn on the day that she received it. So, there's things like that you can do. So I think direct mail is one of those things that, if you're going to send a blanket offer, you're going to do it with minimum effort. It's not going to yield any results. But I think if you've got a compelling offer and you've really thought through what that customer journey is going to be, then you can absolutely bring people into your funnel with that. And also QR codes are great, right? Because then you can put a tracking link on the back of the QR code so you can see exactly where they're coming from as well.
For me, it's just a reiteration is, there's always seems to be a creative element in it, right? So even if it's paid, even if it's technology driven, all of these things, but it doesn't seem just like a mechanical aspect, right? You kind of seem to have to think about and I'm not even talking about the trying different creatives, etc. Just kind of from the taking a step back and kind of saying, okay, how can we kind of get to these people outside of what everyone else is also getting from these platforms. I guess kind of conscious. I would probably skip, unless you think there's some, golden evergreen nuggets or counterintuitive things about customer value proposition that can be shared outside of, without going into each specific product. I would probably go and find that quite interesting, how to scale and what is different from that aspect, but would like to give you the chance to say, no, actually, customer value proposition, there's three things we always see, and this is something that people should take note of.
No, I'm happy to jump into the
Cool.
talking about the scaling bit. I think that's going to be valuable for your audience, probably more so than the value proposition stuff, really, to be honest.
Cool. Let's go.
Cool. So yeah, scaling. So if you kind of break up, you've got go to market and you kind of got that growth piece. It's not binary. It's a scale within itself, right? So once you've gone to market, you start seeing the channels that are working, the methodologies that are working. You get a baseline for your acquisition cost, and then you kind of reach a point, and a good barometer for knowing when it's time to start scaling is when your customer acquisition cost starts to sort of hit a baseline, a consistent baseline, coupled with the fact that if you start increasing budget, that cost doesn't move that much, and then that is an indicator for me that I know if I'm putting in X, I'm going to get Y out. So really at that stage, my first approach is, okay, well, if I know I'm going to put in X and I'm going to get Y out, effectively just keep on spending money, assuming that the cost that you're driving customers in for is cost efficient for you as a business. You can then just start spending money. You can start increasing your budgets, your daily budgets, your weekly budgets, your monthly budgets, etc., across all the channels that you're using. And once that acquisition cost starts to increase, that's the indicator that you need to then start expanding out your targeting. And that might be adding in new audiences to a channel that's already working, or it might be adding in additional channels to the audience that, to target the audience that you're going after. You've got to make a judgment call on that. There's no set rule of going one way or the other. I think the questions you can ask yourself are, is that my primary audience? Is that the highest value audience? Well, let's continue to go after that audience, but on different channels. Or actually, we've tested out some of the other channels and they're not as cost efficient for this particular audience. So let's just expand out the audiences on Meta, because we know that's working really, really well. And then really it's just a case of again, expanding out those audiences until you kind of hit a bit of a ceiling, and you can kind of then move on to other channels. Ideally, what you want to be doing is, have 80 to 90% of your budget really focused on your core acquisition activity, and have 10, 20% of your budget ring fence for experimentation and testing. And that could be anything. That could be testing, different types of new ad formats, testing different channels, testing, driving users into different landing pages. But you should always be testing. That should never really stop. And then the other thing about testing to say is don't try to stick to a schedule. We're going to test this for the first 2 weeks, then we're going to test that for the next 2 weeks, because what will happen invariably is, there's that saying about Mike Tyson, where everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And we've had this with clients, and they want us to plan out their entire testing strategy for the next 2 or 3 months. It doesn't really work like that. Because you don't know what directions the campaigns are going to head in. And you can't make a decision until you see the data. So what you want to do is have a list of things that you want to test, and then prioritize them based upon the outcomes and the data that you're seeing from previous tests. And then don't work on a time basis, work on a basis of once you have directional results, or you have statistical significance, then you can kind of then move on to the next test. Because you might end up in a position where you start putting some activity live, and we've seen this with clients. We've taken on board, and you're like, this will go like wildfire, and within 3 days, like, the campaigns are just going gangbusters. And then in the same respect, with public clients, you're like, you just know it's going to be a bit difficult. And and you're just slogging away for months just trying to get it to work, and that happens sometimes. But sometimes you can't always predict. So yeah, do it on a basis of statistical significance, and then kind of then looking at what you should be testing to help drive that growth. Start or what should be the basis for your prioritization is testing the things that are going to have the biggest impact first. So what are the biggest levers that you're going to pull? So an example I give is testing a new channel or a new audience is going to have a bigger impact than fiddling around with a call to action button on your landing page. From apply now to apply today, no one cares. It's going to may have a 0.5% difference in conversion rate, and if you're not seeing the click-through rates on your ads, and the cost per click isn't good enough, then that's what you need to be focusing on. So start thinking about what's going to have the biggest impacts. And again, like if we're testing out different ads, there's probably no point mucking around with minor changes on ads. You're better off testing out different ad formats first. So test a static versus a carousel versus a video. Okay, great, videos are working better. Right, let's double down on that and test out lots of different types of videos now. And then you establish a baseline that way, and then work your way through the funnel. And then as your business expands and grows, then you've got to start thinking about the I mean, you should be thinking about this anyway, but start thinking about the overall marketing ecosystem that you've got in place. So there's a point at which performance channels like paid search, paid social, affiliate, the broker stuff, needs assistance and support. And that might be around about the time that you need to start thinking about driving your brand awareness. So again, you can then start that off small and then work your way up. So start with some influencer stuff, start with do some display advertising, maybe do some direct deals with some specific websites that your target customers go to, and then work your way up to the TV stuff, the out-of-home campaigns, and kind of all of those bits and pieces. And then you can also do that, in isolation for particular audiences as well. So two of my favorite examples on this is, I've talked a couple of times about targeting ethnic audiences. They're always great examples to give from a case study perspective, because, there's always a geographical locale in nearly every country where you have a higher density of particular types of ethnicities than others. So you can buy media in a local area, in bus stops, in billboards, or whatever it is, and just target that audience in a particular area, and then overlay that with your social advertising. But something that I didn't do, but it was my non-executive director at one of the companies that I used to work at, which was stroke of genius. There was a target customer that they were going after that was using their competitor. So he used to work for Reuters. And so they bought the billboard directly outside the office entrance. And then they changed the creative on a regular basis. So the entire building had to go in and out of that office, and they had no choice but to look at that billboard every single day. Every time they walked out, they saw it. And every time they walked out, it was a slightly different message. And eventually in the end, they hit the decision maker so many times that, he contacted them and they moved them across. So, it can be done, at a real micro level as well, and you can be really, really strategic about it, and how you want to go after your audience. So I think sort of learnings from that is, test rigorously, and consistently, work from the inside out. So start with highest closest proximity to the bottom of the funnel, and then work your way outwards. One of my clients calls it the marketing onion. You start with your target customers that have the highest propensity to convert, and then you work your way outwards. because obviously it's going to be more cost efficient. It's going to get more costly to target those customers as you work out. Think about, when you need to start promoting your brand and driving brand awareness. And then also look at things, not just in the linear fashion of, your entire funnel. Start looking at your customer segments and how you can break out those customer segments and tailor make your marketing activity for each of those areas in those segments there. And kind of the last thing, which is probably the most important thing, just make sure that you've got your tracking and analytics set up properly. If you're a B2C InsurTech, if you've got a web-based self-serve proposition, or you've got a mobile app, you've got to make sure you've got a product analytics tool in place. If you've got an app, then you need a mobile measurement tool in place. If you're more sort of SMEs, similar sort of stack. Even if you're B2B, it's worthwhile having a platform like a Mixpanel or a Heap or something like that as part of your tracking stack, because if you can't see what's going on and you don't have the visibility, then you can't make decisions, and you don't know where you're going to go. At that point, you're just trusting your gut. And although I'm sure everyone's gut is super reliable, it doesn't replace hard data. So that's kind of my approach to driving growth.
One last question. What do you think is a healthy starting mix in terms of, let's say, ad spend and payment for services for an external agency? Let's say I have a budget, what's the minimum budget that one, just to get like a healthy mix, maybe at the start, and how these things can kind of shift.
I mean, you can start off with anywhere between sort of 10 to 20 grand a month on digital channels. And that will give you a pretty healthy starting point, depending upon your target customer, right?
But that's the spend, right? That's not excluding the services.
Yeah, excluding the services, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that will be again depending upon what your targets are as well, right? If you're trying to attract in 1,000 customers a month, you might need a little bit more than that. And then in terms of sort of services or cost of services, I mean, agencies will start anywhere between start from a couple of £1,000 a month, and then usually it will increase incrementally with spend. So that's kind of a baseline for what you should be looking at. So we sort of say, we're only going to sort of work with customers that have got probably about $250,000 a year marketing budget, absolute minimum. That's at the real bottom end for digital channels, and including, because then you need creative, and then you need obviously agency fees as well.
Understood. Tom, been listening attentively?
No, I think it's a good overview.
Cool.
So thanks a lot.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me on today.
Shameer, thank you very much. And I'm sure that anyone who'd like to understand a little bit more is free to contact you, on the usual channels. We'll link you when we post this. And thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me on. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye now.